Viva Las Vegas! We love it here in Las Vegas. Moved here about 2 years ago, and since then we live in 3 different apartment complexes as we've been trying out different neighborhoods. So I had some pretty good insight when it comes to apartment hunting, what you should do and what you should be absolutely careful of. Vegas is a very unique beast, and I have some tips here you don't want to miss if you're apartment hunting in Sin City. So let's get to it. Zip y'all's John Master Lee. Now my wife and I didn't really plan to move to Las Vegas. It kind of just happened. We had fallen in love with the place every time we come to visit. We love the fact that the cost of living is really cheap, yet at the same time, all the world's best entertainment, nightlife, restaurants can be found within a couple of miles square block around here. So when we were looking for an apartment to live in, there were so many things that we learned along the ways while we were looking for an apartment that I have to share with you some tips here. Now a lot of these tips are very helpful for looking for an apartment in general, but there are some things about Vegas that are rather peculiar that you really need to know about. So my first tip here, you should really create a spreadsheet to keep track of all the places that you want to take a look at. In particular, these are the things you want to have jotted down so that you can make a comparison and prioritize which ones you want to see. There's so many apartment complexes here in Las Vegas, well over 100 of them, so you're only going to be able to see about a dozen at most over a couple of days. So my spreadsheet looks like this. I have a column for the neighborhood that I'm looking to live in, because neighborhoods really matter in Las Vegas. There are good neighborhoods and there are bad neighborhoods. The address, so that when I go visit the place to check it out in person, it's easy to find here. The price, the square footage, and a list of the amenities that you really want. Now, when you're visiting each place, I find that at most you can visit about 3 to 4 places in a single day. So if you're an out-of-towner and you want to come in and look for a place, and you have, let's say, a long weekend to do it, you can look at about a dozen places over 3 days. Now, this is a really important tip. You must come and visit these apartment complexes. Do not just do it online. Do not just do it by phone. And particularly if you're looking at houses, because there's been a lot of scams in the past for Craigslist where you think you're communicating with the owner or the proprietor of the housing complex, and ends up being a scam. You send in your money and you end up finding out that this person never had the rights to the place and they're just gone. Now with apartment complexes, you want to see them in person because Vegas has a very distinct style, and apartment complexes can range from being very new to very old. And I'll tell you, every complex online looks really swanky, really brand new. It looks amazing, right? They put up the best pictures or the best video. When you see it in person, you're gonna know about a lot of things that you just can't see online, including the neighborhood around you, the condition of the apartment itself, and the location of it. So definitely come to Vegas to look for an apartment. Now, some places let you do a walk-in. Others encourage you to make a reservation ahead of time. And this is important to do, especially if it's the weekend, because that's when it's the most busy. Now, save yourself a lot of time by whittling down by the apartment complexes that you want to visit. And you do that by calling ahead to confirm a number of key things that are really important to you, the amenities in particular. The first thing you want to confirm is that whether or not they have availability of the size of the apartment that you want. Because what I find out is a lot of things that they post online is outdated. The second one, understanding their pet rules. A lot of places has very specific rules about what kind of pets you can have, the size of the pet, and the fees and stuff like that. And the third thing that I actually look for is understanding the move out window. In other words, how long of a notice they need so that you can move out. And I'll talk about this much more later in the video, but this is one of the most important things for me. All right, so when I talk about neighborhoods, it's really important to understand that there are some really good neighborhoods here in Las Vegas and some really bad ones. And the truth is, some of the ones that are really bad are actually the most convenient. You see, a lot of the apartment complexes that are near the Strip are very convenient to all the fun and activities that are in Las Vegas. But because of that, crime around that area tends to be the highest, and that's something you need to be careful of. Now, when it comes to convenience in the neighborhoods, just realize that living close to the Strip may mean easier access to the fun, but when it comes to rush hour, that one freeway that runs along the Strip, the 15, can get jam-packed during rush hour, especially where there's a convention in town. So if you work north of the Strip and you live south of the Strip, you will always run into traffic. That's something to be considerate about. The ideal scenario is if you live north or south or east and west, make sure your place of employment is in that same quadrant. Now, Vegas itself isn't really that big, and so you can pretty much reach from the outer limits of Las Vegas to the Strip within 15 to 20 minute drive. So if you don't mind spending your time on the road for about 20 minutes to get to the fun, then you can live way out in the much more peaceful, much more beautiful side of Vegas, and it's a lot safer as well. You don't have to worry about being in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Pretty much every neighborhood here has an abundance of grocery stores, restaurants, gas stations, and such. The one tip I would say is that if you live in a particular neighborhood that's near a freeway, that will save you a lot of time, mainly because huge parts of Las Vegas that you have to drive is a block by block design with stoplights. And if you had to travel 2 miles along a road that's basically a stoplight at every single intersection, it could basically double your time to like 30 to 40 minutes. That's something you want to be mindful of. All right, let's talk about price here, because one of the best benefits of living in Las Vegas is that the price is a lot cheaper than a lot of places across the US. In particular, those who once lived in California are fed up with the high prices and are moving here and get an apartment that is about 1/3 of the price. In general, if you're looking at a one-bedroom apartment, you're paying about $800 to about $1,100 for a 600 to 800 square foot place. And for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is about 900 to 1,100 square feet, you're paying about $1,000 to $1,300. And there's a good abundance of 3-bedroom places. You're paying about $1,200 to $1,500 for about 1,000 square foot to 1,300 square feet. Now, the prices that I'm quoting you are for slightly nicer places. You can absolutely get someplace that is cheaper here. But just realize that if you have a pet, you're paying an extra $50 to $100. If you want an in-unit washer and dryer, you're paying about an extra $100 to $150. And if you want a parking garage, you're paying about an extra $100. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, one of the biggest cons of moving to Las Vegas, and that is crime. Las Vegas is definitely one of the cities across the US that has a much higher crime rate. Now, a lot of this is due to the fact that criminals realize a lot of tourists are in town and they're highly susceptible to being pickpocketed, being conned, something going wrong. Now that being said, with a lot of towns that are built around casinos, the minute you leave that area that is built up for tourists, there is a lot of poverty and there is a lot of crime around those neighborhoods. Now, most of the crime that I think you actually need to worry about here that isn't deadly kind, it's really more about making sure that your place is safe from robberies and car break-ins. And basically the way I make sure that I avoid these issues is I check the map. There is a crime map that you can look up online for Las Vegas, and you just read the reviews to find out if there are particular issues. Now, there are certain neighborhoods that have a much lower incidence of crime because they're more suburban neighborhoods that are further away from the Strip, in particular neighborhoods like Summerlin and Henderson. So if you have kids, then these are great neighborhoods for you. In fact, these neighborhoods also have better schools. So the general rule of thumb here is that the quality of the schools tends to be in the suburbs and it tend to be in areas where there's less crime. Now, if you're someone who likes parks and greeneries and trees, I hate to tell you that there are very few parks throughout Las Vegas. So if you happen to find a park that is near the apartment complex, you're in for a treat then. And this is especially helpful if you like to exercise outdoors or if you have a pet. Now let's talk about pets. Now, about 50% of the apartment complex here in Las Vegas will take a pet, but there are all sorts of limitations and restrictions, which I think is now something becoming a standard across the United States. Now, most places here have limitations on big pets, particularly pets that are over 15 pounds. And there are definitely breed restrictions. So you absolutely want to call ahead if you think you have a big pet and a particular breed that could be problematic. Pet fees here usually run about $25 to $50. So just check ahead. Just realize you may have to provide proof of shots as well. That was something we ended up finding out that we had to do and had to scramble to get for our pet before we could move in. All right, let's talk about parking. Now, the one big tip that I will absolutely tell you when it comes to Las Vegas is make sure the place that you're moving into has covered parking. And it's because of the heat in Las Vegas. For at least 3 to 5 months out of the year, that sun comes down and it's intense. You're talking about temperatures out here that will easily climb above 100 degrees, sometimes getting close to 120 degrees, with sun that is beaming down and damaging your car's paint. Now, it can also damage the interior of your car as well. So you absolutely want to have a place where you have shade above your car. The one thing I always do when I ask is if there's enough parking for guests to come by and visit. And in particular, if you don't have assigned parking, is there enough parking after people come home from work? Because usually when you are going out and looking at apartment complexes, well, they're during the day when people are at work, so that it looks like there's tons of spaces available, or they're on weekends where people are also not at work, where people are out and about. So ask how much availability there is. Now, some apartment complexes do provide parking garages, but they are always in limited supply and in very, very high demand. So if you want one, I highly recommend that you ask to be put on a wait list. You usually have to pay about an extra $50 to $100 for it, and it's always worth it, because even if you don't park in it, it's comparable to the cost of renting out a storage unit here in Las Vegas. So just use it for storage. All right, y'all, those are all my tips for looking for apartment complexes here in Las Vegas. I have so many more tips that I promise I'll make a second video about this, because I think it'll be really useful to go into some other issues that I have run into. If you think that's something you want to see, make sure you leave a comment, make sure you subscribe, and let me know, because I will do it. There's so many things that are useful tips here that I've learned about here in Las Vegas. All right, y'all, peace out.
Oh, wow, the sun here. That's so perfect. Ta-da! But too much sunlight is not as good when you do selfie. Right, John?
That's right.